At the height of his fame, Dan Blocker has all that most performers strive for their entire lives: respect, stability, music, and a role that gave him a sense of permanence. That's why the finale was so unexpected. There was a sense that everything would soon return to normal. There was no build-up that felt perilous, no moment that shouted calamity ahead. They never did. Music. What happened next was abrupt, upsetting, and left a quiet that became louder over time. Dulphia Blocker might have become the public face of bereavement. She went with something far uncommon: disappearance, instead. Music, their last chapter became one of music, Hollywood's quietest tragedies due to her refusal to be involved in the story. A giant uprooted from hardship. Little Joe could be charming, funny, and attractive, but Hoss was the one who really won people over. The Cartwright brother was large, timid, a little naive, but incredibly endearing. In addition to his puppy dog charm, he had a gentleness, innocence, and humility that made him irresistible. And the man who portrayed him exuded the same energy. Dan Blocker was already enormous when he came into this planet. He was born in Dalb, Texas, on December 10, 1928, music, and weighed an incredible 14 pounds. He continues to maintain the record for the largest infant born in Bowie County. In a sense, his life began as a tale that others were compelled to share, and that theme persisted throughout. At a young age, his parents, Ora Shack Blocker and Mary Arizona Blocker, relocated the family to O'Donnell, a small hamlet located around 40 miles south of Leach. After losing everything during the Great Depression, Shack, who had previously been a farmer, managed to save enough cash to start a grocery store. Dan did his best to assist the family, who resided in rooms behind the store, by frequently delivering groceries to customers' automobiles. Shack used to joke with his pals that since Dan was so huge, he should pay them to hire him because he was breaking stuff in the store. Nobody at the time knew that his size would eventually prove to be his biggest advantage. With only about 800 residents, O'Donnell was a little town surrounded by expansive ranch property. The main event took place on Saturday nights, and strangely, Dan was frequently the performer. Dan would be waiting, word got out, for anyone who wished to try their strength. A portion of Main Street would be roped off, and he would challenge anyone who dared to stand up. He never lost a battle, Blocker said. He understood exactly what he could do, and even as a teenager, he weighed roughly 275 pounds, give or take. He was so sure of his strength that he even asserted that if he had a few months to train and shed a few pounds, he could defeat Floyd Patterson, the heavyweight champion. It was more than simply conversation. He enrolled in the Texas Military Institute at the age of 13 and joined the football team as a linebacker. A scholarship to Sull, music, Ross State University, where he intended to study English and continue playing football, was awarded to him because of his exceptional performance. He was 6 feet 3 inches and weighed close to 300 pounds by the time he was 18. And as the years passed, he would get even larger. But all was altered by a turn of events. The theatrical club at school required a strong person to lift big dummy props for an arsenic and old lace show. Dan was ideal for the position. He was then offered a small part as Teddy Brewster, the crazy nephew from the play Murderous Ants. His life transformed in that one moment on stage. The intensity, the audience's response, and the sense of being noticed captivated him. He never looked back after switching from English to theater as his major. He rejected offers to play professional football after graduating from music and moved east to pursue a passion he wasn't even aware he possessed. Before landing a modest role on Broadway in King Lear, he toiled in summer stock, repertory theater, and music, gradually honing his craft. Though it would go a different route than he had anticipated, it was the beginning of something greater. Dan Blocker was drafted into the U.S. Army in late 1950 in the midst of the Korean War. Music, after completing basic training at Fort Polk, Louisiana, he trained for 9 months at Sapporo, Japan. He then joined the 45th Infantry Division's Company FN Battalion 179th Infantry Regiment in Korea. He attained the rank of sergeant by the end of his service. His regiment was based in the present-day North Korean region of Chwon, close to the Jamestown line. They found themselves dragged into fierce combat at Outpost Erie in March. Then, on May 25, their patrol was directly confronted by a communist ambush located far behind enemy lines. The Americans decided to fight after being hemmed down and outnumbered. Blocker, music, retaliated against machine guns, mortars, and small weapons while remaining in his position for over 4 hours after one soldier was injured and trapped under intense fire. Even if the injured soldier did not live, his deeds, music, kept the enemy at bay. It was not the end of the fighting. His squad fought at Erie, Old Baldy, and Porkchop Hill from the middle of June until the end of the month before defending Hill 223. Finally, in July, the division was withdrawn from the front lines after 209 consecutive days. Due to combat injuries, Blocker, who had been serving as first sergeant, had to be admitted to the hospital. After being brought home in August 1952, he was recognized with saving the lives of other members of his unit. Sergeant Blocker was later regarded with great esteem by Gordon, music, APTs, one of the men who served under him. Strong, athletic, boisterous in a good way, amiable with everyone, and a born leader, he said. Blocker could smash a beer can between 2 fingers, according to APTs, and yet find time to watch out for every soldier in his command. Dan and Dolia Parker were married in the same year. After being married and feeling more responsible, he went back to school and graduated with a master's degree in dramatic arts. Shortly after, he accepted a position teaching high school English and drama in Sonora, Texas, with twin daughters Deborah Lee and Dana Lynn, as well as sons David and Dirk, to support his expanding family. He went on to teach 6th grade in New Mexico. Every stride he took moved him a bit more to the west, music, gently leading him in the direction of the life he was always destined to, music, lead. Dan Blocker, the most misunderstood celebrity in Hollywood, approached married life with the same steadiness that he used to everything else. He genuinely appreciated sharing his love of acting and language with children, loved being a teacher, and loved being among children. Without realizing it, he may have impacted some people's lives along the road. Everyone who knew him seemed to concur on one point. Dan's heart was enormous. He was often irritable, but he was also quick to say sorry and, music, own up to his mistakes. He didn't relocate his family to California in order to pursue celebrity or attract attention. It was a straightforward and realistic idea. Dan enrolled at UCLA to pursue a PhD in dramatic arts, continuing to teach during his studies. Although he still liked acting, it wasn't yet the main focus of his life. That started to alter in the middle of the 1950s when he began trying out for TV parts in order to supplement his income. He was a perfect fit because of his size and presence, and westerns were popular at the time, music. After landing one tiny role after another, he gradually gained expertise in front of the camera. When Peter Sears backed out of playing Major T.J. King Kong around this time, Stanley Kubrick even attempted to replace him in Dr. Strangelove. However, Blocker's agent rejected the script, and Slim Pickens was ultimately cast in the role. It was one of those lost opportunities that only make sense when looking back. As the Goon, credited under the name Don Blocker, Blocker made an appearance in the 1957 Three Stooges short Outer Space Jitters. He appeared in a Sheriff of Cochise episode that year as a bartender. A click was made. Slipping into several roles while returning on stage made him realize how much he loved performing. The work then began to come in steadily. In well-known programs like Gunsmoke, The Rifleman, Have Gun Will Travel, and Maverick, he even had the opportunity to showcase his innate comedic timing. After making a debut on Walt Disney's Zorro in 1958, he was given a permanent part in the short-lived Cimarron City series. The short runtime of the show likely felt like yet another blow at the moment. In actuality, though, it was the break he wasn't aware he needed. After it was cancelled, he was able to assume the part that would come to define his life. Everything changed when he was selected by producer David Dort to play Hoss Cartwright on Bonanza. Dan abandoned his doctoral studies to pursue acting full-time, mostly because the job required all of his abilities. It was also worthwhile. Hoss was the show's heartbeat, emotional core, and unwavering soul that kept the music Cartwright family together, if Little Joe was its main character. The fact that Bonanza wasn't an immediate hit is surprising. Ratings were so poor when it debuted that NBC thought about ending it after just one season. The fact that it had to compete with Perry Mason during its Saturday night time slot was one of the issues. The show didn't even make it into the music top 30 in its first year. However, the network accepted it. They rescheduled Bonanza for Sunday evenings at 9 p.m. Then everything at last made sense. The show's popularity increased, its ratings skyrocketed, and it started the lengthy run that would ultimately last for 13 more seasons. Season 2's ratings saw a significant boost when Chevrolet joined as a sponsor. Nevertheless, due in large part to the high cost of production, the show almost vanished before it had a chance to be successful. The show had gone over budget, and the New York network had intended to terminate it after the first 13 episodes, as NBC executive Thomas Sarnoff later disclosed. In the first year, it cost roughly $15,000 per episode to film Bonanza in color, which was a significant sum at the time. Sarnoff intervened, promising to keep the production within budget, and he succeeded in doing so. With Dan Blocker's Hoss at its core, Bonanza survived and went on to become one of the most cherished television series in history. Something clicked with America the instant they encountered Hoss Cartwright on Bonanza. This tall, 6 feet 4 inches man weighed well than 300 pounds and appeared to have stepped out of a legend. Yet rather than being a terrifying savage, Hoss was polite, hilarious, uncomfortable, and incredibly gentle. He stammered as he said he got into mischief. When he revealed his heart, the audience fell in love with him right away. The moniker Hoss was a light-hearted play on the word horse, a colloquial expression for big as a horse. The fit was flawless. However, Dan Blocker's total absorption into the part was what really sealed the deal. Millions of fans did not consider Hoss Cartwright to be a character. He felt like a human being. That's where the big contradiction starts. Because Dan Blocker was not at all like the sluggish, unthinking ranch hand he played in real life. With a master's degree in theater, he was extremely well educated. He had taught in schools before his acting career took off. In addition to being politically progressive, he was well-read, intensely devout as a Free Methodist, and intellectual. He advocated liberal causes, including Eugene McCarthy. Behind the scenes was a shrewd, introspective, and intellectually interested man. However, Blocker and Hoss have one very important thing in common despite their differences: an overwhelming feeling of empathy. Blocker was a strong believer in love, justice, and music, standing up for what was right. All that he brought to Hoss was subtly influenced by his belief. Kids, music, felt it right away. Parents did as well. Hoss, music, never seemed cunning or manipulative. There was nothing about him that was concealed. You received exactly what you saw. A good man in a complex environment doing his best. Blocker battled the extent to which he was becoming engrossed in the role early in Bonanza's run. He later acknowledged that in the early seasons, he frequently thought he and Hoss were the same person. The lines started to blur because he spent so much time developing the character, researching him, and attempting to comprehend his thoughts. Blocker did not feel comfortable enough to distance himself from Hoss until around the 5th season. He could, music, take on the role of Hoss every morning and leave him behind on the soundstage every night once he had a complete understanding of who he was. Nevertheless, Hoss continued to reside within him. Because we only come this way once, Blocker frequently recalled a phrase from the Quaker missionary Stephen Greeley from the 18th century: if there is any kindness to be shown or any good to be done, it should be done now. Hoss Cartwright's emotional core was formed by this ideology. That straightforward concept was the source of every kind gesture, awkward apology, and act of loyalty. Off-camera, Blocker's resilience showed in surprising ways. He broke his clavicle when he was flung hard from a horse during one filming session. He did an almost inconceivable thing instead of going to the hospital. He himself set the bone. After that, he got back up and completed the scene. He didn't take time off to recuperate till after. Ironically, he gained a little weight while recovering, and the same horse that had thrown him was unable to carry him when he returned to set, music. It exemplified Blocker's quiet grit perfectly. He had been awarded for his duty in the Korean War, but he did not discuss it much. He was permanently altered by war, particularly with regard to firearms. Despite the fact that Bonanza was centered around shootouts, outlaws, and frontier justice, Blocker truly hated guns and publicly stated that, although he was required to carry one on television, he had no desire to deal with them in real life. One horrible night in Korea, while sitting on a hillside, he saw how helpless a person becomes when another person is in possession of a pistol. This realization sparked his hatred of firearms. Any sense of invincibility he had was dashed in that instant. He liked to hunt before the war. He had no firearms after the war. He forbade his sons from going hunting at all. It didn't make sense to restrict her by shooting animals for sport. He thought that calling it sport was misleading until animals could be trained to shoot back. He took a forceful, deliberate, and intensely intimate position. This produced a fascinating contrast. Hoss occasionally reached for his holster on screen. The individual portraying him disliked using violence as a remedy off-screen. Music. On the Bonanza set, Blocker discovered a true family, something uncommon in Hollywood. Michael Landon and Lauren Green became particularly close to him. Even though Landon was still young, he already had strong opinions about storytelling, character direction, and the direction of the program in the early days of the series, when I was really striving to identify this character. He might be unyielding. He might quarrel with network executives and producers. He was hard on some people. Blocker, however, noticed another thing. Passion. Landon had a strong emotional attachment to the program and its characters, which helped build Bonanza over time. Despite spending a lot of time together, frequently from early in the morning until late at night, 5 days a week, the actors nonetheless made the decision to socialize outside of work. Because of their strong relationship, Blocker was best man at Michael Landon and Lynn Noy's wedding. Blocker did make appearances in a few movies, notably Music, Come Blow Your Horn and Lady in Cement, both starring Frank Sinatra, despite Bonanza taking up much of his schedule. Nevertheless, Hoss was his legacy and television was his home. Despite his notoriety, Blocker never lost sight of his roots. When was the last time you visited Texas, boy? A month or so ago, I was in Dallas, I see. Oh, that was just now. Yes. His hometown of O'Donnell, Texas, Music, continued to embrace him as their own even after he relocated his parents to California so they could be nearer to him. The recollection of the calm, diligent youngster who was usually holding a book made people desired a life, a genuine one. It he found in Lugano. He could concentrate on his roles as a father, husband, and private citizen. Without the constant interference of cameras and throng, he could watch his children grow. He could sit in a cafe and not be bothered. He was breathing. It was a world away from the studio lights and soundstages, as well as the dusty paths of the Ponderosa Ranch. That distance was significant because, despite the fact that Dan Blocker was discreetly adopting a whole different identity, millions of people saw him every Sunday night as a towering cowboy. Not as a celebrity or an icon, but as a husband who cherished his wife, a father who desired normalcy for his children, and a considerate gentleman who merely desired some tranquility in a stunning region of the world. That was from Switzerland. Furthermore, Dan Blocker valued his tranquil existence more than any level of celebrity. The terrible demise of Dan Blocker and his spouse. Dan Blocker came back to the United States in 1972 to start production on the final season of Bonanza. Music, however, there was an issue. Everyone in his vicinity could see it. Blocker was extremely exhausted, weak, and depleted. The large man who had appeared unbreakable had lost his typical vigor. He went to the hospital out of concern, where the physicians found that he needed to have his gallbladder removed. The actual process was regarded as standard. One of the most popular surgeries in America was and continues to be a cholecystectomy. Every year, millions go through it. There was no cause for concern that something would go wrong. Blocker had faced much more difficult circumstances throughout his life, such as fighting in Korea. In contrast, this seemed doable. The procedure seemed to go without a hitch. Following that, Blocker thought he was, Music, at last free from the gallstone agony that had plagued him for years. He felt a sense of relief for the first time in a long time. Expecting to return to work and continue the season, he was sent home to recuperate. Then, a few hours later, everything was different. Blocker felt lightheaded. He was in excruciating discomfort. His wife, Dolia, was alarmed and hurried him back to the hospital. He was never seen again. Dan Blocker passed away later that day due to a pulmonary embolism. A large artery had been blocked by a blood clot that had reached his lungs. It was a tragic, unexpected, and abrupt death. He was alive once, making plans for the future. He vanished with the next song. Dan Blocker had only been alive for 43 years. The shock immediately spread. His spouse lost her spouse. 4 kids lost their dad. Music, Bonanza's cast lost a brother. His best pals, Michael Landon and Lauren Green, were devastated. Millions of admirers worldwide found it difficult to understand how someone who seemed so stable and musical, enduring could suddenly disappear. After Dan Blocker's untimely death, Dia found himself at a crossroads in both his work and personal life. She might still have been well known. She was able to conduct interviews. She had the opportunity to use her husband's celebrity as a springboard. She made no decisions. Rather, Dia walked out of the spotlight entirely. Her priorities were raising their kids, keeping their privacy safe, and honoring Dan's memory. She did not remarry. She never tried to attract attention. She never made an effort to change the past. As she and Dan had always wanted, she lived a calm, purposeful life. Much of what is known about Dia's later years is still unknown because of her extreme media avoidance. It was just the way she wanted it. She was more concerned with peace than with public interest. After a while, she also died gently, leaving behind children and grandchildren who continued the principles she and Dan had upheld.